Welcome to DGD After Dark. You know who it is, Robert Reynolds. Got our man Chris Phillips from the Spurs Up show on tonight. We are doing a pretty in-depth breakdown of the South Carolina Gamecocks ahead of the 23 season. First things first, Chris, how is it going?
Rob, what's going on, man? I tell you what, if I wasn't already fired to talk to you, that intro sure as shit got me ready to run through a brick wall, my man. So I'm happy to join you, man. Excited to talk college football, talk Gamecocks specifically, of course. And we're here, man. Fall camp's getting rolling, just over a month away from kickoff. Heck, week 0 is just around the corner. So, man, I appreciate you having me on. It's really a blessing to be chatting with you here on this Monday night, and looking forward to it.
Absolutely, man. As always, I think a lot of things ahead of the 23 season, right, are waiting to be answered, right there. Listen, obviously it's an opponent preview. Week 3, man. Week 3, y'all. South Carolina comes to Athens, right? So there's a big game there, big implications. A lot to tell from both sides, right? Georgia side, we've discussed this ad nauseum, but I kind of want to get into pick your brain about these Gamecocks, man. Obviously we saw what happened in Columbia last year, but that's a new year, right? New offensive coordinator, right? Let's start there. Um, so Satterfield is gone now, right? And you look at bringing in, oh my word, what's his name?
Dabble Loggins.
Dabble,
Yeah.
yeah, Logan. Sorry.
Mm.
So you bring him in. What are your expectations for what the offense should look like
Mm.
this year?
So to simply answer it, Rob, I'll say my expectations of what I expected to look like, much more of what the last 3 games of 2022 looked like, and much less of what we saw in the first 10 games. Based off everything that Dowell Loggins, Shane Beamer have said, going back to his introductory press conference when he was hired, simplifying, getting the football to the playmakers, not having 15-word play calls and 22 personnel sets, making things easier for your playmakers to simply go out and make plays. Now, of course, Dowell Loggins, he'll have his own wrinkle in it and what he learned from Kendall Briles over at Arkansas, what he learned in the NFL. Shane Beamer will insert his own wrinkles. Of course, they'll come together as a staff and have some different things. But I tell you this, Rob, I don't think they're reinventing the wheel offensively. And they didn't do that. That's not why they had success in the final 3 games of 2022. I think simply what happened, again, they had 22 different personnel groupings. They had this, felt like 500-page playbook. And it really just felt like, again, Rob, as simple as it sounds, they simplified. They got down to say, hey, let's run 12, 15 plays we really, really like. Let's make Spencer Rattler comfortable. Let's let him do his thing, be himself, be a gunslinger, throw the football more vertically down the field, not so much swing pass type of stuff, if you will. And it worked wonders for them. Now, we'll see if that carries over in this season, how that plays out. I think there's a lot of questions, Rob, around the offensive coordinator hire, and I was one certainly that has question. And I think when you look at the resume, and there's both pros and cons of this hire, right? I mean, again, you look at his experience at Arkansas, what he learned to Kendall Briles. Guy's an elite recruiter, by the way. You talk to anybody out of Fayetteville, they'll tell you he's one of the best recruiters they've ever had. But the resume is not promising. And this is a guy, Rob, that has never called a play, not just at the SEC level or the Power 5 level, at the collegiate level. He's never called a play. Again, that doesn't mean he's not going to be very good at South Carolina. That doesn't mean he's not going to be a massive upgrade from what Marcus Satterfield was, because number one, Rob, I think it's impossible to be worse than Marcus Satterfield was. But number two, I think just based off the things that they have said, and I think the lessons that Shane Beamer, I think learned from that Marcus Satterfield experience, I think will help him in the long run. So expecting good things from Dowell Loggins. I think there's a lot of optimism around what he brings to the offense. But certainly, Rob, when you've got an offensive coordinator that's maybe got a shoddy resume, has never called a play at the college level, there's a lot of questions, a lot of concern. And I think the only thing that, only time will tell, what Dowell Loggins' future will hold at South Carolina and exactly what this offense will look like under his tutelage.
Well, I think like you brought up a good point, right? Like with week 3 last year for Georgia, what we saw last year at week 3 compared to when, if I'm not mistaken, that was when Kinchis was calling the plays, right, against Tennessee and against.
Yeah, that is the assumption. I mean, it wasn't anything official. Of course, Shane Beamer never came out and said that happened, but based off of everything we've heard, again, when you think about the reinvention sort of offensively over the Tennessee, Clemson, and Notre Dame games, it's pretty well understood that the play calling duties or a lot of the offensive game plan was taken off of Marcus Satterfield and Shane Beamer, Freddie Kitchens, maybe even Justin Stepp injected their opinions and thoughts into the offensive game plan. So I'm not going to sit here and say that Marcus Satterfield was just completely shunned for the offensive meeting room and had nothing to do with it, but certainly there was as much intervention and change and outside opinions brought into that, than there ever had been all season. So I do agree, Freddie Kitchens, which I think that's an underrated loss for South Carolina on the coaching staff. He's now at North Carolina, ironically enough, but I think it was Freddie Kitchens more than likely that was calling those plays.
Well, I guess my thing was obviously from a third-party perspective, right, outside of the Georgia game, right, like it was noticeably different, right? It seemed like there was far less conservatism, and it just allowed Spencer Rattler to play, I felt like. Now, what we see this year from South Carolina in week 3, it's going to look a lot different than what we saw last year. I get that. I'm not going to sit here and say that, it's going to be some of the same. It makes no sense. But also, right, with a new year, I don't see some of that stuff being done again, right? The conservative type play calls on third down, like just watching that game, I'm sitting there like, when it was out of reach, right? You're sitting there like, why are they still throwing swing passes? Why are they being that conservative when you're down 3 scores? Like, stuff that just doesn't make no sense. And I think Georgia fans kind of have some flashbacks from seeing things like that too. But I think this year, right, looking forward, you got Spencer Rattler coming back. That's a huge piece of news for South Carolina. Then you look at, right, so you've got him coming back, but you also have some departures. Kind of give us a feel for what the team's going to look like. We'll start on the offensive side of the ball first. What is it going to look like? Who was brought in? Who left the program? What can we expect from the personnel standpoint?
Well, Rob, I'll start with Spencer Rattler because you made the point. I mean, obviously, anytime you return your starting quarterback and a guy like Spencer Rattler, and he showed you late in the season last year what he's capable of, I mean, that's a huge boost for any football team. In a year in the SEC, which you look around, Rob, of course, Georgia's one of them. There's so many new offensive coordinators and there's so many new quarterbacks. The fact that the Gamecocks at least have one of the 2 pieces returning, certainly a positive sign this year when you've got the combination of Spencer Rattler at quarterback and Juice Wells on the outside, who I think you could argue is the best returning wide receiver in the SEC. That's a great place to start. They have other key pieces that are coming back from last year they feel good about, but, really, honestly, Rob, you were gutted in the transfer portal. There's just no other way to put it. Jaheim Bell, of course, heads to Florida State. And I think that was one that most of Gamecock Nation probably saw coming after the way the season went. His family was disgruntled on social media, the way that he was being used, and so he departs. But the Marshawn Lloyd one, Rob, at running back, that was the one that I think really served as the gut punch and one that really took people's eyes surprised when he announced that he was deciding to transfer and eventually ended up at Southern Cal. So, it begins with Spencer Rattler, Juice Wells. Those are going to be your go-to guys. Obviously, Xavier Legette is somebody Gamecock fans, Gamecock Nation is really high on. He returns on the outside. Finished the season really strong last year. Amarian Brown returns at the wide receiver position as well. DeCarrion Joyner, a do-it-all player, he now slides to the running back position, which is really where, Rob, the big concerns are for South Carolina when it comes to running the football, and I'll get there in just a second. You talk about new additions. You added Trey Knox from Arkansas at the tight end position. Joshua Simon from Western Kentucky at tight end as well. That's a guy the coaching staff was really, really high on in the spring. They feel good about him going into the season. They feel like he'll be a household name by season's end. I mean, again, you completely revamp the tight end position. At the wide receiver position, you add freshman Nicholas Harbor, Eddie Lewis from Memphis over from the transfer portal. So the Gamecocks are just like every other football team or every other team in college football, really depending on the transfer portal and a bunch of new guys. Shane Beaver mentioned 38 new faces on this football team, and they expect true freshmen to play at every single position. But I've saved the weakness and the deficiency, and I think, Rob, the biggest question mark for last, if you will, the running game. The running game as a whole. South Carolina, like I mentioned, was gutted by the transfer portal when Marshawn Lloyd headed to Southern Cal. They really, in my opinion, did not address that need. And that was a swing and a miss, I think, from this coaching staff. And listen, it happens. It is what it is. But you add Mario Anderson from Newberry College, a Division II transfer. Hey, he won the version of the Heisman Trophy at D2. Outside of that, you added no one. Dontavius Braswell, I will say, is a true freshman. He inserts himself now as fall camp begins. Was a 4-star signee, actually out of the state of Georgia, and they feel like he can compete there as well. But it's going to fall DeCamerion Joyner is going to be RB1 when this season starts against North Carolina. Now, is it a running back by committee type of deal? Is he RB1? Does he carry the load, Rob? That's yet to be determined. Juju McDowell also in that room as well, and he has a ton of experience and has made big plays for South Carolina. But they are searching for answers in the rushing attack, searching for ways to not be one-dimensional. Oh, by the way, Rob, they're weak at a position on the offensive side that you can't afford to be so. And the reason that Georgia, I think one of the biggest reasons Georgia dominated South Carolina, the line of scrimmage and the offensive line. The Gamecocks returned 50 less starts there than they did a season ago. And that's an offensive line, Rob, that last year surrendered 31 sacks upon Spencer Rattler and finished outside of the top 100 in rushing offense. And oh, by the way, you lost Jalen Nichols, your best offensive lineman, most likely for the year, in the spring game. Now, again, they tried to pick up some guys, or did pick up some guys, if you will, from Western Illinois, Mercer, Yale, Charlotte, if you will. So we'll see if those transfers can work out for them. They can find their best starting five. Lonnie Teasley now slides in full-time at the offensive line coach spot. But the big thing is this, Rob. You've got the quarterback and the receiver duo. My biggest question and my biggest fear really for South Carolina, can you find balance? Because I don't care what skill guys you have. It's a line of scrimmage league in the SEC. If you can't run the football, you can't stop the run, you can't protect your quarterback, you simply don't have a chance, Rob. So if South Carolina can address that question and answer that question and have just enough balance, well, I think they're going to be really dangerous offensively. But if you get one-dimensional like a Georgia can make you, I think it could be tough sledding at times this season.
How much pressure is on Spencer Rattler this season to perform? Obviously, with the deficiencies in the running back room and some deficiencies there on the offensive line, is there any added pressure for Spencer since he returned? I would assume so by default, but I don't know how much. What are your thoughts there?
Well, Robin, I'll just say this. This is the SEC. Everybody has pressure. Spencer Rattler has pressure. Juice Wells has pressure. Dowell Loggins has pressure. Shane Beamer has pressure. I mean, it's just SEC football, man. Everybody has pressure. But certainly when you look at Spencer Rattler and, listen, Rob, you and I both know the quarterback gets way too much of the credit and he gets way too much of the blame. And so if things don't work out offensively, folks are going to look to a couple of people. First, they're going to look at Spencer Rattler and they're going to blame him. Second, they're going to blame Dowell Loggins. It's going to be one of those two people, right? Because, again, the quarterback, the OC, the head coach, they all get too much credit and way too much blame when things go good or bad, if you will. So, I think, Rob, certainly there is a fair amount of pressure on Spencer Rattler to improve on what he did a season ago. Because, Rob, let's call it for what it is. Through the first 10 games, Spencer Rattler was nothing short of a cataclysmic bust at South Carolina. The last 3, he was the best quarterback in college football. So now the question, Rob, is which version of Spencer Rattler do you get, and which one do you get more of, if that makes sense? I don't think it's fair, obviously, to expect him to play at a Heisman Trophy level week 1 to week 13, but there's got to be more consistency. He's got to do a better job of taking care of the football, and it's going to be even more maddening this season if you don't get that best version, because you know what Spencer Rattler's capable of, Rob. You saw it in the Tennessee game. You saw it in the Clemson game. And I'll say this, Rob, I think the Clemson game last year is a great representation of who and what Spencer Rattler is. He's a gunslinger, man. And at times it's going to lead him to throw a 72-yard touchdown pass and put his shoulder down and score a touchdown and make a great throw in the end zone on 4th down and lead you to a win over your arch rival on the road. But other times you're going to throw a pick 6. You're going to throw a pick in the end zone. You got to live with some of that bad to get the good that he provides. So, I think there's immense pressure on Spencer Rattler to improve. I mean, a lot of people, you look at Gamecock fans talking on social media, they'll say Spencer Rattler didn't come back to go 6-6. He didn't come back to go 7-5. He came back to improve on what he did a season ago. Can he do that? We shall see. But certainly as QB1, there is a lot of pressure to have his best collegiate season thus far at South Carolina.
So with that being said, along the offense, and obviously we'll talk defense in just a moment, but offensively, which player are you most intrigued or excited about this season? Who should Gamecock fans, Georgia fans keep an eye out for from Chris? Who's your one?
The
guy?
Offensive player I'm most intrigued by or excited about, you said, correct, Rob? Okay.
Yeah.
That's a tough one because I think there's a number of guys that you could pick, but I'm going to go with one. The guy that I'm most excited and intrigued to see, honestly, it's a familiar name, Rob, DeCarrion Joyner, because I think he's for the first time truly going to be a focal point of the offense. And DeCarrion Joyner, Rob, and this is the greatest compliment and the highest honor I think you can give any college football player. Because DeCarrion Joyner on a national scale, even a conference-wide scale, he's not going to be remembered for being an All-American or winning the Heisman or being first-team All-SEC. But, Rob, he's one of those players. Georgia has him. Carolina has him. Clemson has him. Everybody has him. He's a folk hero. He's one of those guys. He's a campus legend. He will forever be a legend. It doesn't matter what he does this year, by the way. The Duke's Mayo Bowl, the selfless way that he has just done whatever the football team has needed, the way he has filled whatever role it is they've asked, and he's performed when doing so, that alone has made him a Gamecock legend. But now DeCarrion Joyner, guess what? He's a focal point in the offense. I mean, this is his opportunity, man, to go from nice role player, nice story, to you're the feature guy, man. Like, go be all SEC. Go rush for 1,000 yards. Go make big plays. Go help South Carolina win football games. I am just fascinated. I don't know if he's going to be the breakout player necessarily, Rob, but if there's a guy that I'm just, if I had to pick one on offense that I am just most fascinated to watch this season, it is DeCarrion Joyner, because I feel like I know what I'm going to get out of Juice Wells. I know what I'm going to get out of Trey Knox. I think Xavier Legette could be a really fun piece to watch on the outside. Of course, Nicholas Harbor, I think, especially by the midway point of the season and even early on. But, really once he grasps the nuances of the wide receiver position, I think that's a guy that's going to be, that's most excited I am to watch a freshman's Nick Harbor. But to me, there's no storyline more fascinating than DeCarrion Joyner. After his career, the way it's shaken out, going from quarterback to receiver to running back, and again, going from, hey, nice role player, fun story, to you're the dude, man. Like, you're RB1. We're leaning on you to answer our questions in the running game. Can he do it? And what a poetic ending it would be, Rob, to his career in Garnet and Black if he could turn in his best season yet.
Yeah, see in the comments, Driftwood has Trey Knox, and the stat guy has Nick Harbor. You alluded to this name. After what I saw against Tennessee, my eyes are on Juice Wells. You look at, right, because I just think that he has the capability, if given the time, for Spencer Rattler, right, to stand in the pocket and deliver passes. I think that's the guy that will stretch the field vertically. I know you mentioned Nick Harbor as well, but the experience to go with that matters, especially when it comes to true SEC ball. So, for me personally, I think from at least from my perspective, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but I'll be interested to see how he does as the guy too on the outside. Because I think that might play a big role in y'all's success, especially against your bigger opponents.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Rob, I think at this point, Juice Wells still doesn't get the respect he deserves as one of the most lethal playmakers in the SEC. And he's a real dude, man. He's going to be playing on Sundays. He's going to be taken to the NFL draft. He's a real dude on the outside. Now, he needs some help. That's my biggest question mark. Who's number two? Who's the number two guy who's going to take the pressure off of Juice? Because as well as I do, SEC defensive coordinators are good enough. If you got one pitch, they're going to find a way to take it away. They're going to double him. They're going to bracket him, whatever. They're going to shade his side of the field. So who steps up? Is it a Nick Harbor, the 5-star true freshman? Is it a Xavier Legette? Is it a Eddie Lewis from Memphis? Is it an Amarian Brown? Is it the run game? Is it Trey Knox at tight end? Is it Joshua Simon who surprises? So there are other guys. There are options. Listen, there are playmakers, Rob, on this offensive side of the football. There's plenty of them. South Carolina, there's no excuse, especially, because I have to caution myself because I'm like, wait, wasn't I saying the same exact thing last year when they had Jaheim Bell and Marshawn Lloyd and Josh Vann and all these other cast of characters, and it didn't work out? But now you have a new voice leading the offense, and it should be more simple. It should be much easier to navigate. Spencer Rattler shouldn't have nearly as many things to think about. The check with me at the sideline, and he should be able to go out and just play ball. The biggest question is, can the offensive line be serviceable enough and give enough of a run push to create balance? Because let's not get it twisted, Rob. I think the one thing I'm comfortable in saying, this is going to be a pass-heavy offense. South Carolina is not going to be a team, for what my money's worth. They're not going to line up and beat you with the run game. They're not going to rush for 250 or 300 and shove it down your throat. they're going to pass the football. They're going to put the football in the hands of their best player, which is Spencer Rattler, or their second best player, if you want to say Juice Wells is number one. What are 1A and 1B, right? That's who they want touching it, and you need everybody else to support those two guys. So can the offensive line give him enough time? Can they get enough of a run push? Can Dowell Loggins get creative in the run game and find ways to sort of, Rob, manufacture a run game? And I think they will be able to do that. Again, I think the offense is going to be much more consistent. And, Rob, my prediction for the season is this. I think Dowell Loggins, listen, I have my question marks about him. The resume is extremely shoddy, and, we'll see long-term how it plays. But this season, he's going to be an upgrade from Marcus Satterfield because, again, nobody can be worse. He's going to be an upgrade. I think what folks are going to realize as we get later in the season, though, and end of season, is that, okay, we got the OC. Dowell Loggins is an upgrade. We've got to fix the offensive line. Like, it's a problem. It's a concern because there's just, if you have a bad O-line, Rob, hey, Mike Bobo was at South Carolina. He wasn't able to do much of anything. Granted, he did lead a great rushing attack, but the offense still, was suspect, and South Carolina did not have a great record. But the point I'm trying to make is that Hugh Freeze said it at SEC Media Days. Great players make great play callers, right? So, like, if you don't have those big uglies up front, I don't care if Steve Spurrier's calling the plays, you're going to struggle. And, of course, they're recruiting and addressing those needs as we speak. But, certainly, I think that combination of Rattler, Wells, that's what they want to lean on. And certainly, to your point, Juice Wells is a guy I think he's not nearly talked about enough when it comes to SEC circles.
It's funny. Like it's so timeless and cliche, but X's and O's before Jimmy's and Joe's before X's and O's is 100% accurate. Like it just has to be that way. Before we go to the defense, I do want to give a shout out to our first sponsor, Apotheos. Apotheos Roastery, located in Kennesaw, Georgia. Listen, best coffee on the market, hands down. Cannot tell you otherwise. I will not tell you otherwise. That is the best coffee, hands down. Give them a follow on Instagram, Twitter. Instagram is at Apotheos Roastery. Twitter is Apotheos Coffee. Listen, go to DGDpodcast.com and click the drop down from the shop menu. Get you some coffee today, folks. Get you some coffee today. Get you this big bag right here. Get you that big bag right there, folks.
Who doesn't love a good cup of Joe, man? Yeah, I'm going to try me some.
Every morning. Now, you're not a dog fan, but use DGDpodcast.com and click the drop down for the shop menu, right? Get you some Apotheos. Every bag of coffee, 20% of the proceeds from each bag of coffee that you get will go to the Classic City Collective because they're the official partner of the Classic City Collective. So keep that in mind, folks. Get you some good coffee. You need it. Just going to leave that there. Anyways, Chris, I want to transition over to the defense. This is where it gets tricky. South Carolina, you lose Cam Smith in the secondary. You lose Jordan Birch. I think he transferred to Oregon, I believe.
Yep.
Other than that, though, those are the two names that I'm aware of. But what's the defensive side of the ball looking like for South Carolina looking ahead to the season?
So, yeah, Rob, we'll start with key losses. I mean, you mentioned first on the outside, Cam Smith, Darius Rush. Excuse me, those are two big-time guys, of course, taken in the NFL draft, and you'll replace those with Marcellus Dion and O'Donnell Fortune. More on that in a second. At the linebacker position, you lose Sherrod Green, Brad Johnson, both, veteran linebackers on your football team, although Clayton White, based off his latest comments, I think he feels pretty optimistic that they're actually addition by subtraction type deal. They're upgrading with some of the guys that'll be filling in those spots. And you mentioned Jordan Birch hits the transfer portal to Oregon. That was another one that was, really surprising. The guy played in the bowl game and, a week or so later decides, hey, I'm going to hit the portal, heads out to Oregon. I think you do lose Gilbert Edmond at the other edge spot. Your two starting edge guys are gone. Gilbert Edmond transfers to Florida State. So, Rob, like I mentioned, Gamecock fans don't like to hear me say it. And listen, South Carolina picked up a lot of valuable pieces in the transfer portal. They picked up some guys that they're going to make impacts. But I thought South Carolina was one of the losers of the portal. When you think of the starters, SEC legitimate starters that they lost, they got gutted, man. They got gutted. And again, they addressed their needs in a lot of areas, but they got gutted by the transfer portal, no doubt. Either way, you look at the defense. Let's start at the back end, Rob, because I normally start on the defensive front. The back end, you return two of the best safeties in the SEC. That's a good place to start. Nick Eamon-Worry and DQ Smith, both guys last year that were freshman all-SEC players. You feel really, really confident about those two guys in the back end of your defense. I'd expect David Spalding to be at the nickel. He's a former Georgia Southern Eagle, by the way, but played for you last year, has played for the last 2 years. I think he's a solid player in that secondary. Marcellus Dial at one corner, who played a lot of football for you last year, of course, was actually really good for you, had a couple of interceptions, I think led the secondary in interceptions. And then O'Donnell Fortune fills in at the other corner spot. Rob, this is a question mark. And listen, folks in Gamecock Nation are giving the benefit of the doubt, as they probably should, to Touraine Gray, the defensive backs coach, and the job he has done, because they have been fantastic in his first 2 seasons coaching the secondary. Now, some of that is because the run defense hasn't been great, which we'll get into in just a second. But he's done a great job of taking a guy, again, like a Darius Rush, who just got drafted, who was a receiver a couple of years ago, changed positions, and a guy that I think most fans thought, okay, this guy will be a nice role player or whatever, but he was a receiver at one point. What can he do at DB? All Touraine Gray did was make him into an NFL guy. So Touraine Gray gets the benefit of the doubt, but that's certainly, especially when you factor in the teams we play in early on with their quarterbacks, these pass-happy offenses. How does the secondary stand up to a guy like Drake May in that UNC offense? How about Georgia, their passing offense with that crop of receivers they have now? How about Mississippi State with Will Rogers? And I know they're not running the air raid, but that dude can still sling it around. Tennessee with Joe Milton. We know what they want to do. So that secondary is going to be tested. At the linebacker spot, Rob, I think, again, I probably feel as optimistic about South Carolina's linebackers as I've felt in quite some time, because this has been a position unit, Rob, call it for what it is. It has been an eyesore. I mean, they've normally had one guy that's pretty good, whether it be a TJ Brunson or an Ernest Jones or a Sky Moore or a Shaq Wilson or what have you. But they just top to bottom have not been very good at the linebacker position. I'm not saying they're going to be great this year, but I think you can start to see some signs of this room starting to turn over and flip a little bit with guys like a Grayson Pup Howard, who's a true freshman, who I think has freshman All-SEC written all over him. A guy like Mo Kaba, you get back from injury, who went out in week 2 last year. He did not play against the Georgia Bulldogs because he tore his ACL. That is a huge boost for this linebacker room. Stone Blanton was a guy who was forced into action as a true freshman. He was a former 4-star prospect, 4-star signee. He should be ready to have a big-time breakout sophomore campaign. Debo Williams is a guy who's played a lot for you the last couple of years. He's a veteran player there. You pick up Jerron Willis, the Ole Miss transfer out of the portal as well. So I think the linebacker position, again, while it's not going to be great compared to years past, I do think this is a room and a unit that's ready to take a step forward. And then the defensive front, Rob. This is a defensive front and a defense as a whole, right? Because Shane Beamer pointed out at SEC Media Days, it takes all 11. But this is a defensive front and a run defense that has finished outside of the top 11, 11th or worse in the SEC, 5 consecutive years in rush defense. Last year, you finished 116th, giving up 198 yards per game. And oh, by the way, one of the big losses that I feel like nobody's talking about for some reason, you lose Zach Pickens in the middle, a former 5-star defensive tackle. He's now gone to the NFL. So you have Boogie Huntley, you have Tonka Hemingway back on the inside, Nick Barrett, TJ Sanders behind them, a couple of guys that need to take steps forward. Elijah Davis, who was a big-time JUCO guy, number 1 in JUCO. He is first year at South Carolina. They're expecting him to make a big-time impact. You do get Jordan Strawn on the edge back from injury. Again, he went out almost simultaneously as Mo Kaba did in that week 2 game at Arkansas. So that's going to be a big boost. A guy at Georgia State who in 2020 led all of college football in sacks. And then you did go to the transfer portal and pick up Jatius Gear from Syracuse, who's actually a South Carolina native. He had 3.5 sacks a season ago for the Orange. So, you added some guys there. Depth is a concern at multiple of the positions that I just mentioned. I'm very curious to see. I think the defense is going to be about what it was last year. I think the run defense, because the linebacker position is going to be slightly better, could take a small step forward. And I think maybe the secondary takes a slight step back. And so I think when you combine that, I think they're about what they were last year. But there's a lot of questions here, Rob. Call it for what it is, because, again, you have not been able to stop the run worth a damn. And as we were just mentioning, run the football, stop the run. It's a line of scrimmage league. And South Carolina, the reason they haven't competed, again, with a Georgia, the Bulldogs can just run it at will. They can run it down your throat. There are these big physical offensive lines that could push you around, and that's what South Carolina has suffered. And that's honestly, Rob, one of the reasons their pass defense has been so good, because teams haven't had to throw the ball on them. And that helps your statistics. Just call it for what it is. So this is a big year for Clayton White, though. I mean, it would not shock me if the defense took a slight step back just because of the question marks, and especially if you're not getting the football off of people and getting the turnovers. If you're not doing that, that could lead to a step back as well. But it's going to be an interesting year for the defense, no doubt, in Columbia.
I was looking at it, right? You bring in, I think this might be one of your biggest impact players on the defense, and that's Xavier McLeod.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, Xavier McLeod's a guy that I think is one of those youngsters that Shane Beamer was alluding to that will play early and often. Desmond Umeozulu is the other guy, big-time 4-star guy on the edge. And again, edge is a place they need help. I mean, defensive front, they need help, but edge certainly, I mean, that's what they're addressing right now in recruiting. Xavier McLeod, though, I think a guy, we didn't hear a lot from him in the spring. It was Umeozulu that really stole the headlines, but you look at the guys they're recruiting, man, just length, speed, agility, quickness, what you have to have in the SEC at that position. So I think McLeod's a guy that could certainly help him. And there's a lot of youngsters. And I'll tell you this, Rob, because I've mentioned the O-line and the D-line, and, I feel like a broken record. And it's just, it's not the sexiest thing to talk about, because I feel like you want to talk Gamecocks, let's talk Rattler, let's talk this guy. That it's like South Carolina's success this year, it really comes down to the line of scrimmage. And I know that's not the most fun thing to talk about, but like when you finish outside of the top 100 in both rushing offense and rushing defense, Rob, that's what you have to solve to go to the next level. That's what you have to figure out. If I had to pick one of the two sides, though, I could see the defensive line taking that step forward this year. Also, I didn't mention this, Rob. Travian Robertson, your new defensive line coach, who is a Gamecock legend, was a fantastic player, was on the SEC championship team back in 2010, has had a fantastic coaching career at Georgia State, Tulane. He's now at South Carolina. I think that's going to be a perfect fit. I think the Gamecocks upgraded by the departure of Jimmy Lindsey to LSU and adding on Travian Robertson. So I feel more bullish on the defensive line than I do the offensive line. I think also, like you mentioned, a McLeod, a Umeozulu, some of the guys they've added. I think there are real athletes and real bodies up there that can help you. I don't know with the offensive line. I just don't know that, that's a position that you really need to, it's almost like a farm system in baseball. Like, you need those guys in there a couple of years before they're ready for the big leagues. More on the defensive line, they can just kind of plug and play, and if you're a great athlete, you can make it work. So, I think McLeod's certainly a guy that can help. Umeozulu another, and they're going to need those young guys to step up if they're going to make strides in that defensive front.
Absolutely. I think you look at the roster, the key additions, key departures, and I want to transition into the schedule, right?
Yeah.
How this roster, how the depth and everything will transfer over. So I'm going to pull up a graphic for the South Carolina schedule for this season. Kind of walk us through that. We'll kind of walk through the schedule. We'll break it down by half first. So first things first, right? Game day, going to Charlotte, right? So you got a neutral site game against North Carolina. Then you host Furman. Then obviously week 3, you come to Athens, right? Which obviously is first SEC game. Looking forward to that. But then you follow it up with a trip to Mississippi State. New look Mississippi State team. We don't know what that'll look like. But then this game is probably going to be circled on every Vol fan's calendar. Trip to Tennessee before your bye week. Let's kind of walk through that real fast. First things first, let's start with North Carolina. How are you feeling ahead of that game?
Yeah, Rob, I look at it as a tone setter for the 2023 season. And, of course, you're going to hear people say, the schedule's a gauntlet. I mean, what's new when it comes to Gamecocks football? But, many Gamecocks out there, Rob, are labeling that game 1, that week 1 against UNC. Of course, College Game Day will be there. They're labeling it, though, as the most important game of the 2023 season. And while it's an important game, Rob, I just disagree, because we've seen South Carolina start slow and then get it going late and salvage their season. I mean, look at last year. I mean, South Carolina was abysmal in their first 4 or 5 games. It struggled week 1 against Georgia State, could have lost that game. That game against Arkansas week 2, they lost. That was much closer than the score indicated. Georgia happened, of course. I mean, you were tied with Charlotte at halftime in week 4. So South Carolina was able to overcome that slow start. That being said, Rob, I mean, there's no dancing around just how big and how important that game is to, I think, Rob, and I was actually talking about this today on our show. You win that game, and I feel like you have more to lose almost than you have to gain. And I hate saying that because Gamecock fans were expecting to win that football game. And I haven't seen, I've maybe heard one person pick North Carolina to win. Everyone is going with South Carolina in that football game. Heck, I'm picking the Gamecocks as well. But it's one that if you're going to reach your goals, if you're going to hit 8 wins and match last year's win total, God forbid you're going to exceed that and finish 9-3 or better and finish second in the East. That feels like, Rob, a game that you have to have because all of a sudden, if you lose it, I think you really reset expectations. Like, I think you have to look at it as, okay, how do we get to 7-5? Let's just make a bowl game. And I hate to have that drastic of, because I've got South Carolina, of course, beating UNC and going 7-5. And I think it's a game that, hey, you could lose it, but it's just one of your 50-50 games. It's one of your swing games. And I feel like folks will look at that and say, if you can't beat North Carolina, it's only going to get tougher down the stretch. Also, you just think about the fact that it's a regional rivalry. It's a natural rivalry. These schools recruit against each other, and you're on the national stage, right? I mean, a primetime kick, college game days there. You want to put on a good show. So, certainly, Rob, I look at that game as a major tone setter for South Carolina season. It's not the most important game, and the Gamecock season isn't over if they lose, but no doubt it is a major tone setter for this year.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was about to say you kind of have to have that statement game to start the season off. Look no further than last year with us, man. We had to set the tone against Oregon, and really.
And Rob, it's not to cut you off, Rob, but it's a fascinating matchup too when you look at how similar the teams are. Both have big time quarterbacks with NFL aspirations.
No defense,
right? The defenses, but I think both teams have question marks at the line of scrimmage on both sides. Both teams have new offensive coordinators. I mean, it's going to be a fascinating matchup for sure. And, I think I feel confident that South Carolina can and will come out on top. But, I mean, it's week 1, too, man. You never know. It's just unpredictable because everybody's basing what they feel like these teams will look like. They're basing it off of the end of last year. And you and I both know, like, that just doesn't apply, right? I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that Carolina beat Tennessee and beat Clemson and that North Carolina lost their last 4 in a row. It's a brand new season. So we really have no idea. And I thought one of my good friends, Braden Gall, who does a fantastic job with his show. And, he made a great point on his show one time a couple of weeks ago that just said, we've never known less about these football teams than we do now because of the transfer portal and the way these rosters are changing. We think we know, but dude, with as much turnover, I mean, again, there's 38 new players on South Carolina's roster. We have no idea how those pieces are all going to come together and click. So it's going to be a fascinating game in Charlotte for sure.
I mean, you could be like Dion and have basically 90% of your roster from the portal, but neither here nor there. But I do want, so obviously after North Carolina, right, you got Furman, trip to Georgia, Mississippi State, then a trip to Neyland. Listen, those 3 through 5 is going to be rough, right? You just have to look at that right there. But then, I feel like the time is right for the bye week, right? Because you get the gauntlet out of the way. You go to Georgia, you go to Neyland. Right, 2 of your hardest games on the schedule potentially are early in the season. So, there's some pros, there's some cons to that. But first things first, with that right there, I'll pull the graphic back up. I think the X factor here is that trip to Tennessee, right? Listen, what y'all did to them last season in Williams-Brice, I thank y'all for that. It was a humbling moment for them, and I applaud that. So I just want to give you
and I'm gonna Rob, absolutely, that was a hell of a night, man. I've actually got the piece of the shrub from Willie B enshrined over here, actually framed in the studio. But I'm gonna group Florida in this first half of the schedule because I want to point something out with this because you mentioned week 2 against Furman. Not your typical FCS game. It's the team preseason top 10 FCS. Gamecocks will take care of business, though. That week 3 game at Georgia, which I'm sure we're going to get into more later in the show, it'll be somewhat of a measuring stick game in the sense of I think South Carolina will very much so, identify how far they have to go. Georgia's got a new quarterback, replacing both tackles. Mike Bobo at OC. There are some things that Georgia is going to be learning about their football team as well. But, I think the Dogs obviously will be at minimum a 3-touchdown favorite on their home field. But then you get into that Mississippi State game at Williams-Brice Stadium. That's one of those 50-50 swing games you have to have if, let's say, you're going to match last year's win total. I've actually got that right now, Rob, as a loss, which was not a popular pick amongst Gamecock fans. And it shocked me how I was like, do you really feel like this is a game South Carolina can't lose? How long have you been watching this team play? It's a very winnable game, don't get me wrong. But South Carolina has been known for slow starts under Shane Beamer. Either way, that's a huge game at Willie B. That Tennessee game, Rob, like you mentioned, that to me is the biggest swing game of this season, in the sense that, if South Carolina loses that game, so what? Everybody's expecting them to lose, right? That we've heard it all offseason. Tennessee's got that game circled. Ball fans want to beat Carolina by 100. They don't want to win the game. They want to beat them by 100. So if South Carolina,
for blood, for
right,
sure.
If South Carolina loses, so be it. If the Gamecocks win that game, though, Rob, outside of what it would mean for Carolina, Tennessee, and Shane Beamer getting a leg up on Josh Heupel, I think all of a sudden that's what brings 9 wins into the picture. Assuming that nothing's going haywire in the first couple of games, right? Let's say you take care of business against UNC. You take, let's say you start 3-1, and all of a sudden you go to Rocky Top, and now you're 4-1. I think all of a sudden you start to look at this, right? You start to look at this season a lot differently. Realistically, though, that's going to be a really tough challenge. And I tell you this, Rob, of all the swing games I had listed, that's the one that I feel is least likely a W, because I just, after what happened last year, Tennessee with revenge on the mind, they've had that game circled all offseason. I feel like if there's one game that Tennessee shows up and plays a complete football game, it's going to be that one. I just, until I'm proven wrong, I feel like that's going to be the one. You mentioned a bye week as well that comes after. That's important. South Carolina is 15-2 off of the bye week since 2009. And they
bring up Florida,
and they
too.
take on the Florida Gators, which is the 6th ball game. And I want to group that with the first half, Rob, because I think that game against Florida is the most important game of South Carolina's 2023 season. When you factor,
is it the hinge point?
To me, it is. Like it is a game. When I look at the most important, here's why I label it the most important, Rob. When I label a game most important, it is a game that I feel for South Carolina to reach the full potential of what their season can be, they have to win it. If you lose to Florida, you're not going to have a good season. I just don't see it. Like, that is going to be a really detrimental loss to your hopes, your dreams, and your expectations of the 2023 season, especially when you factor in what Florida is probably going to be this year. With Graham Mertz as their starting quarterback, they've got 2 nice running backs with Montrell Johnson and the other kid, but they've got issues all over the field. So I think South Carolina has to have that one. The key is this for me, Rob. 3-3 or better through the first 6. And I know Gamecock fans will scoff. We should be at minimum 4-2, more like 5-1. You have to recognize how difficult the schedule is. It is a gauntlet.
It's not the opponents, it's how they line up too.
Right. That's what you have to factor in. People don't think about that. Like, that's one of the big reasons I picked South Carolina to lose to Mississippi State, because I look at that game. It's the week after the Georgia game. The Gamecocks are beat up. It smells like a noon game at Williams-Brice against Mississippi State. Most of Gamecock Nation's thinking this is just going to be a walk in the park. RIP Mike Leach, he's no longer with them, and Mississippi State's going to fall off a cliff. I think Mississippi State, Rob, and this is kind of a side note, I think State's going to be a lot better than people realize. I think when you got a quarterback like Will Rogers,
from the air raid. Yeah, you get away from the air raid and you see Will Rogers in more of a pro-style offense. The dude can sling the ball comfortably, but now you utilize the running backs with him, and you open it up the you know what I mean? It's more of a balance. It's not just pure air raid. I think that it forces teams to look at Mississippi State differently by default.
Yeah,
but but then again, to your point, right? Like, I think South Carolina should handle Mississippi State.
Yeah.
However, even at home, you still have to win the line of scrimmage on both sides. And to your point earlier, if you don't do that, any SEC team can run on you. You know what I mean? So that is the thing that intrigues me most about how your games line up most of the season, to be honest.
Yep.
Because you look at Florida's strength's going to be their run game. You look at Georgia. Well, Georgia, we'll talk a little bit about Georgia right now, actually. Georgia's more air more. I think we see us hit a lot more air, go through the air. But even then, I think the main focus, and I feel like this game's going to get nasty, and it's because of just how experienced our offensive line is, and exploiting the defensive line. I think that is going to be the telltale sign for how that game goes. I'm not going to predict a score or nothing like that right now by any means, but just knowing how deep Georgia is at the offensive line, it kind of doesn't matter what running back you run with, whichever one you want to choose. But even then, you've got Carson Beck. Even when Carson Beck came in last season, it was intriguing to watch because he looked comfortable because of the pass rush, or lack thereof, excuse me. For South Carolina to get involved in this game early, you have to get the pass rush to him. You have to get to him and make him uncomfortable. I don't know if you saw our spring game. Our defensive line was struggling to get to him, and again, that's a testament to the offensive line, very experienced. So I'm looking at it, and it's like if South Carolina does not get to Carson Beck, it's going to get ugly.
Yeah. Well, Rob, you've seen my predictions. You know I'm not somebody who's about to come on this show and give you some long speech of why South Carolina is going to do the unthinkable and shock the college football world. I mean, it's very well noted. I picked Georgia to beat South Carolina by a final score of 41-10. I don't think the Gamecocks are there yet, man. I know they're not yet. I know they're not. Now, listen, it's college football. Crazy things can happen. Could it be a situation in Athens where Georgia – Carson Beck, for whatever reason, isn't the guy that Georgia fans think he's going to be and turns the football over. And, it's just one of those weird days. Spencer Rattler, right? I mean, I think he showed last year, if he's on to that degree, he can beat anybody. But the stars would literally have to align. And at the end of the day,
it has eerie 2019 vibes.
It would have to be. But I think Georgia is so much better than they were back in 2019. I mean, just worlds better than they were.
I'll tell you right now, offensively, it's light years different. Yeah. I mean, Georgia fans along with me will still throw up when we hear the names James Coley. I'm just going to leave that there.
Yeah. And Kirby Smart is worlds better of a head coach than he was in 2019. But again, just to echo your points, man, I think Georgia, because of what they have in the line of scrimmage, I mean, you also factor in, again, the wide receiver position. You add Thomas. You have Ladd McConkey back. That's probably one of the best group of wide receivers Georgia's ever had. I mean, ever.
Deepest, yeah, for sure. 100% deepest,
the deep. You have Dominic Lovett, too, right? You guys picked him up as well, is that right?
So you got Dominic Lovett, Marcus Osmond-Jacksaint. Yeah. You've got Ladd McConkey, Thomas. You've got Arian Smith, Anthony Evans. You've got Dylan Bell, Denylon Morissette. The reason why I said Dylan Bell and Denylon Morissette is Carson Beck had a good chemistry with them last year, transferring over into the spring as well. So you bring all those guys on top of Brock Bowers and Oscar Delp. It's just stupid.
Well, and again, you can boil down that South Carolina-Georgia game as simply as this. It's a line of scrimmage game, and I think South Carolina will simply be outmanned. I went as far as to say on our show that I said that this will be a game that the question is not, can South Carolina hang with Georgia, beat Georgia? My question, Rob, how many times will South Carolina cross the 50? I mean, I'm just
bring it back to 2011 title.
And I don't mean to sound like a pessimist, defeated, doom and gloom Gamecock, but I'm just keeping it real, man. I don't know how South Carolina is going to move the ball offensively when they won't be able to generate any sort of rushing attack. My biggest thing is get out of that game healthy. Like, do not get Spencer Rattler hurt. You ask too much of him. That Georgia pass rush, they're going to pin their ears back. And, I mean, my goodness, man, the last thing you need to do is lose the ball game and lose your starting quarterback. So,
I mean, you would have Lenore Sellers, too. I think that's going to be in the future, right. That dude's going to be good. But you talk about this, and for any South Carolina fans listening, I just want to kind of give you an idea on something. What you saw defensively from Georgia, while we did lose some more guys to the draft, a lot of our key guys in the key positions came back with another year of experience. So when Chris, when you bring up passing the 50, I'm not going to say that just as much, right? I felt like that's a little bit too comfortable or too uncomfortable, too deep for me. I will say though, how well can you move the ball? Because you're going to have to find a way to get Dak Joyner the ball. If you can't run between the tackles, you've seen this. Georgia's predicated defensively to stop the run. Period. That's what we do. That's what Georgia does. Forces you to become one-dimensional. You attested to this earlier. But the thing about it is, I think if you're Darryl Loggins, you have to be creative. And I'm not talking about just like hitting home runs, right? Like even Bobo at South Carolina, Bobo at South Carolina had to hit home run after home run after home run just to score against Georgia, even back then. Nowadays, it's light years different. So I think you have to look at short screen and be able to block. And it's not even offensive line versus defensive line. I think it's cornerbacks versus secondary, or receivers versus secondary.
And how by the way, Rob, how have we gone this far talking Georgia, South Carolina, without mentioning, by the way, they got a guy named Brock Bowers who's pretty difficult to defend, and he bullied the Gamecocks last year. So that'll be a test in itself.
Yeah. I think another thing, though, and this is where you talk about with Mokaba and those key additions in the linebackers, I'm not going to guarantee that they have better time covering. I think there can be some things to take away from last year that could help. Brock Bowers is just a unicorn. Yeah. He's just a unicorn. If you going to go back to our spring game here for a second, Carson Beck threw a perfect pass. Couldn't have been anywhere else. Darius Smith, one of our edge guys, is like 6'6", 240, 250. Stride for stride with Brock Bowers. And this is why I think offensively, Georgia's going to be lighting people up. But the touch that he had on that pass, and Brock Bowers made it look effortless, and it's the tightest of windows, right? But you also, I don't know if you saw in the, Kent State game, jet sweep to Brock Bowers for a 75-yard touchdown. You don't do these things with a normal tight end. You just don't. Now, I will say, you don't have to worry about Darnell Washington. And Darnell Washington, for your defensive line and your ends, was a nightmare. I mean, 6'7", 280, or 6'7", 270, excuse me. You go out and catch passes, but he was just a unicorn as well, just a tall one. Obviously we can talk about South Carolina, Georgia all day, but I do kind of want to get into the back half of the Gamecocks schedule. You talked about you grouping the Florida game, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll bring that back to it. So pulling the graphic back up, you go to Florida. Or no, sorry, Florida comes to home. Excuse me. So Florida goes to Willie B. But then you have back-to-back road trips to Como and College Station, and I think that's where it gets tricky there. But then after those two, you host Jacksonville State, so it's literally the Yard Pimp Classic. Then you got Vanderbilt and Kentucky at home before going up to Clemson, if I'm not mistaken.
So Clemson is actually at Willie B this year. So the Gamecocks.
Oh wow!
No, you're good. The Gamecocks close out, which I know it's weird, by the way. I don't know how many teams in college football close out with 4 straight home games. But you mentioned that second half, Rob. To start with back-to-back road trips to Columbia, Missouri, and Texas A&M. The 2 longest road trips, by the way, that you have. Which whoever made that in the schedule, I have no idea what they were thinking, but.
It's also the folks that created the SEC, where we still have yet to go play College Station.
Right.
So there's that.
Yeah, but I mean, that game, kicking off the second half, that game against Mizzou, I mean, that's one of those pivotal 50-50 swing games, man, where South Carolina has lost 4 straight to the Missouri Tigers. That's a game you've got to find a way to reverse that trend, get that monkey off your back, if you will. And, Gamecock fans, they don't understand how it's possible. They look at Mizzou as below them. There's no way we should ever lose to Mizzou. And every single year, Eli Drinkwitz and the Missouri Tigers, they're beating up on the Gamecocks. So that's a huge game.
Hey, Gamecock fans. Hey. Look at us last year.
Dude, yeah.
When they want to come play, they can play.
Yeah, you got to put some respect on Mizzou every now and then, for sure. I mean, you got to put some respect on that program. But, you go to Texas A&M the following week, one of the toughest places to play in college football. You snapped that streak last year, but you've still never won at Kyle Field. And I think, Rob, for everything it's worth, I think Texas A&M is going to be much improved for sure off that 5-7. I think that, you look at it.
They have to improve.
Yeah, you look at it.
I
you
think
look at
the
that
question
roster.
is their offense with Petrino.
Yeah.
I think that's I know you probably know this too. It's the one component of that team that's going to drive or crash that whole vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that. I mean, you look at that roster, man. The way they've recruited, that should be at worst an 8-win team this season. So
they're loaded. They're loaded with talent, but again, I think it's a culture thing, man. That culture just there was no reason for them to just collapse the way they did.
Yeah,
especially with the talent. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we heard the rumors that they were smoking weed in the locker room at Williams-Brice Stadium before the game started.
I heard about that.
I mean, yeah, it was a mess, but I think they'll rebound. I think Texas A&M. That'll be a really tough game for South Carolina. I've got Texas A&M winning the football game. I actually got the Gamecocks snapping the streak against Mizzou the week prior because I think just at some point streaks end, and South Carolina was really good at that season ago, and I feel like it's a game where South Carolina will finally do so. And then again, you close out with those 4 straight home games. Again, this is why it's so important to survive the front half of that schedule because things do ease up in the back half, right? You have the Missouris of the world. You get, Jacksonville State at home, Vanderbilt at home, Kentucky at home. And, of course, Jacksonville State will be a W. Vanderbilt, you've won 14 straight. That streak will be snapped at some point. It ain't going to be there.
Don't sleep on Vanderbilt.
Right.
I'll tell you.
I like Clark Lee a lot. I'm a huge Clark Lee guy.
Well, AJ Swan.
Yeah.
I think AJ Swan.
Yeah.
Like, let's just say this. For the record, I think you look at South Carolina winning that game. But do not underestimate what Clark Lee has with AJ Swan. I think you utilize him, and I think you could surprise them. Listen, they did it last year. They beat Florida. They could easily do it again.
Yeah. Well, again, to your point, Vandy's going to beat South Carolina at some point. I don't know that it's this year at Williams-Brice. I think Carolina can get the job done there. And then you close out with Kentucky and Clemson. And listen, I think Kentucky's going to be a really good team this year. I think that's a big.
I don't.
You don't? Okay, so I think Kentucky.
I think they just lost too much, though, Chris. And the reason why I say that is
leaving SEC Media Days, they were one of my stock up teams. When I looked at them, what they've added through the portal on the offensive line, that crop of wide receivers, Devin Leary at quarterback, Liam Cohen at OC. Defensively, they've got some questions, and they've also got to figure it out on the offensive line. I think Kentucky's going to hover around an 8 or maybe even a 9-win team this year. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm drinking too much Big Blue Kool-Aid, but
if you look at how they're predicated to run, like they run the ball, right? You lose Chris Rodriguez. You lose some offensive pieces.
But you pick up Ray Davis
from
Vandy and Demi Sumo Karngbae from NC State. So
I'll tell you right now, I'm just not sold on Kentucky this year. This year,
they are very heavily reliant on the pieces they picked up in the portal have got to pop. If those things happen, if those guys pan out, Kentucky, I think, is going to be a force. To your point, though, it's a lot of moving pieces.
Well, you've also got Devin Leary coming off the injury. How will he come off of it too? Yeah. Right? Like, you expect him to get better throughout the season, but how much better? Right? I feel like it's another Will Levis situation that maybe even like a poor man's Will Levis. Maybe I don't. Right. We'll see. Right? I'm just holding my reservations with Kentucky.
Fair enough. And that's a game. That's a game at Willie B that you feel like late in the season, South Carolina's playing their best football. They should win. Then of course you close out, with the Clemson Tigers and you snap that streak last year. And I think Gamecock fans who are very confident the Gamecocks can win that game, of course, and you get them on your home field. You got Spencer Rattler back yet again. So, and to make it 2 in a row against them would be really big time in the sense of turning that rivalry. So anytime you're at Williams-Brice Stadium late in the season, Final Four at home, you feel really, really, really good about your chances. So South Carolina should be set up, Rob, to have a big finish of the season yet again.
Speaking of finish, it wouldn't be a Gamecocks preview if we don't talk about Carolina Clemson. I'm going to let you take this one away. We saw what happened last season, kind of come from behind, hold them off, right? In their stadium, by the way, so they had to rush the ball after losing. Just beautiful thing to watch. People cry, run to the ball still. But nonetheless, I digress. Moving forward, you got a new year at Willie B. You got Cade Klubnik
Mm.
looking to be the guy at Clemson. What are your initial thoughts, observations, takeaways from that game ahead of the? Excuse me. Obviously, way too early, but what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's going to be a wildly competitive game. I think for, last year, I think there was a lot of hype and hoopla, but I mean, South Carolina was still a 16-point underdog the week of that game. I think for the first time in a long time, we're going to go into game week, and that's going to be damn near a coin flip. I mean, in the sense of like, it might be a touchdown favorite, Clemson, or 4.5, 5.5, whatever the spread is, but I think it'll be much, much closer than years past. And I think South Carolina now has a newfound confidence taking on the Clemson Tigers. With that being said, I'm high on Garrett Riley. I think Clemson hit a home run with their offensive coordinator. I think that he and Cade Klubnik are going to do really well. I mean, they're going to tear up the ACC, right? That's not a problem. I think Clemson
should.
Yeah, they absolutely should. I mean, Clemson's got two of the best running backs in college football, in Maffa and Shipley. They got 4 or 5 offensive linemen back. If they can get any sort of production, which it's a big question out of their wide receiver position with Bo Collins, Antonio Williams, I think their offense should be really productive. Again, my biggest thing in that game is this, and defensively, of course, they return 8 starters. They got a pair of the best.
They got some nasty freshmen coming in.
Yes, that
Peter
too.
Woods.
Yes, that too. And I mean, they're going to have one of the best defenses in college football. But I've got Clemson edging out South Carolina right now, and the reason is this, Rob. I think it's going to be a really competitive back and forth game. Number one, does Clemson allow South Carolina to dictate that game on special teams yet again? I just can't. I don't believe that they do. I think Clemson's number one objective will be to stop special teams. Number two, Clemson's quarterback last year, DJ Uiagalelei, went 8 for 29 in that ball game against South Carolina. That's not going to happen again.
I was going to say with Klubnik, I don't see that really. I mean, it could, but
it's not going to happen again. They're going to be much, much better offensively. And if you go back to last year, one of the reasons, Rob, I was so confident South Carolina would beat Clemson is I felt confident for the first time since 2013, the Gamecocks had the better quarterback, and it wasn't even close with Spencer Rattler versus DJU. I think Cade Klubnik gives them enough, pushes Clemson ahead of South Carolina, who still to right now has a more talented roster than the Gamecocks, top to bottom. But I think it'll be a really competitive back-and-forth game. Would not shock me at all if South Carolina got the dub in that one.
I look at it this way too, and I went on record for a bold prediction. I don't know if it'll happen, and if I'm wrong, whatever. Watch out for Duke to upset Clemson in Week 1, because I genuinely don't think people value what Mike Elko did at Duke in year 1. Now, obviously, we know that people are going to have kind of a magnifying glass on him a little bit now. But Riley Leonard could torch some folks if things get going the right way. I'm not saying it will, but I'll go ahead and make the prediction. Fuck it, I'll do it, whatever. Sure. Week 1, Clemson's trying to break in stuff. And it happens because they go to Durham. And even if it might not be the hardest place to play, listen, they got a brand new quarterback. Didn't do so hot against Tennessee, and that defense is trash.
Hey, from your lips to God's ears, Rob, I'd love to see nothing more to cap off Week 1 of college football.
Oh, Jesus. If it happens, I'm just saying people are going to come back to this. If there's a clip, if somebody clips it, I'm not worried about it. I've got the hot take. But no, I think that game will be pretty interesting, right? The Palmetto Bowl should never disappoint.
Yeah.
Especially if – obviously, listen, I think you'll have to get the run support, right? That's going to matter. They've got some good running backs. And even then, you've got Cade Klubnik that can run too. So you have to be able to stop the run. And ultimately, if South Carolina's not able to stop the run or has a hard time trying to stop it and have to allocate more bodies, it's over. Even if Clemson's receivers aren't necessarily like scary like they used to be, right? Like you remember, you have Watkins and then Hopkins. It's not like those guys or Justin Ross. It's not none of those guys, but they're still not bad either, right? And Klubnik's going to be a good quarterback, regardless whether you hate him or love him. I'm just going to leave that there. But I'm pull the grab. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was gonna say, Rob, to your point again, that you make the point about the running game, what South Carolina's got to do, and again, I talk a lot about line of scrimmage, offensively, defensively. If I had to go with something else, because that's very low hanging fruit, very obvious when you look at the statistics. I said it this time last year. I think it even more so applies going into 2023. Bottom line, this South Carolina football team will go as far as 7 takes them. It's all on Spencer Rattler, man. Especially when, you asked about the pressures earlier and stuff like that. You're not going to have much of a running game. You're going to have to lean on 7. There's going to have to be a couple of games this year, multiple probably, where Spencer Rattler takes it upon himself. You know what? I got to put the team on my back. I got to have a special performance, lead us to victory. If South Carolina is going to reach their full potential, let's say match last year's win total, that's going to have to happen again. I'm not saying Tennessee where throw for 430, 6 touchdowns, whatever, but he's going to have some performances where it is very obvious and evident that, you know what, Spencer Rattler, he has taken it upon himself to lead his football team to victory. He's a guy that can impact his team in that way. And so I think a key for South Carolina this year, it all comes down to 7.
So I want to kind of wrap things up here. So overall, what is your prediction? What is your final regular season record if you had to stamp it? Now I know you're probably going to do something for your show, but if you had to do something somewhat firm,
Yeah.
right? Somewhat soft stamp. What would you say?
Yeah, so Rob, I actually locked it in, beginning of July. Actually, I did
Okay.
that right before SEC media days. I'm at 7-5, 4-4 in SEC play. I've got the Gamecocks falling to, let's see if I can recall it, Georgia, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Clemson. I've got them losing those 5 games. But again, 4-4 in SEC play. I got to come out of the gate beating North Carolina. Again, I've got the Mississippi State upset after the Georgia game. I think it's going to be, Rob, a very typical South Carolina season, what we've seen the first couple of years. Everyone says we're looking for consistency. Where's the consistency? And I agree. But when you have the question marks the Gamecocks do on the line of scrimmage, I think that actually leads, Rob, to inconsistency because you get in certain matchups where it's favorable or not favorable. And when you get pushed around and bullied, you get some of those wild results. And of course, when you have a quarterback like Spencer Rattler, who's so Jekyll and Hyde with his performances, you never know what you're going to get. So I think it's going to be kind of that typical up and down South Carolina year where, the Gamecocks, because of their culture, I think they're going to win a couple of games people don't expect, going on the road to Mizzou and winning that one, taking down Kentucky late in the season as well and finishing the season strong, what have you. But 7-5, Rob, when you factor in the question marks this football team has, and I think, Rob, last year's team was actually better than this year's team. And this year's team has a harder schedule. So that being said, and I picked 8-4 last year, I'm going with 7-5. 7-5 feels like the right pick for this group when you factor in, just simply put, all the question marks they have entering the season.
I want to do mine real fast. So I'm gonna pull the graphic back up here and kind of walk through it. So I got North Carolina. I'm gonna give you the dub here. I know Drake May, but I'm just gonna leave that there. They have no fucking defense. Furman, that's a dub. Georgia, loss. Mississippi State, I'm gonna give you the dub on that one. Tennessee, as much as I'd love to see him have a night again, I think Tennessee gets you this time. So either way, going into the bye week, I see you at 3-1, right? Or no, sorry, 3-2. Excuse me, 3-2. You handle Florida this year. You get revenge. You don't get you don't get blown out by Florida. Sorry, Florida is trash. It's Gator garbage. So there's your 4. I think you beat Missouri, so that's 5. You lose to A&M. I think you knock off a streak here. You go Jacksonville State, Vanderbilt, and Kentucky, and lose to Clemson. So I got you at like 8-4.
Which I think is very doable. I think 8-4 is very doable for this Gamecocks football team. And it wouldn't surprise me, Rob, they got back there. Again, when you just factor in the fact that, Shane Beamer loves being doubted. At the over-under 6.5 in Vegas, yet again, they love being doubted. They overachieve at every turn. Would not surprise me if they did that yet again.
I mean, I think you're setting up for another successful season. I think obviously, listen, I understand if South Carolina fans are listening to this, it's coming from a Georgia fan, so please take it how you will. Just be patient, right? I know people look at year 3 as the make or break year. But when you look at your recruiting as well, you know, especially the 24 cycle we brought in 23, helps on the way. You just got to be patient. You know, you look at the offensive line help; it's being addressed in a huge way for what it's worth, right? You got Cam Pringle, right? That's probably the cornerstone of your offensive line, and that's the biggest question mark there too, right? So helps on the way, right? I mean, you think about it. I mean, you know this. It's one of these things where you're stuck. Well, now 2024 things, all bets are off at this point. All shit's gonna look different. Like you don't have to necessarily play Georgia, right, every year. So it's gonna be vastly different. So things are gonna change in a good way or bad way. Final question before we wrap this thing up: how do you feel about the 24 with the divisionless?
I think it's cool. I mean, I will say this: not having Georgia, Tennessee, or Florida in the schedule is it's strange, right? The first time since 1991 we haven't seen those teams on the schedule, and I know we're going away from divisions, but it feels very SEC West heavy when you see the Gamecocks play teams like Texas A&M, of course, who they play every year, but Ole Miss, LSU, and I believe there's one more in there that I'm forgetting, of course. But the trip to Norman stands out. That's really cool. The trip to Alabama, that's another one, of course. That's a lot of fun. So I mean, it's one of those things, man. I'm glad that Texas and Oklahoma are in the league. As someone certainly that makes content around it, I cannot wait to talk about Texas and Oklahoma. But it's weird not having Georgia every single year. Yeah, horns down, exactly. But it's weird not having Georgia, not having Tennessee, not having Florida every single year, and it puts even more emphasis on those matchups this season for sure.
I mean, you bring up Texas and Oklahoma. I mean, did I do it right?
Yeah, just
horns down. They can get salty all they want, but whatever. But no, man. So obviously, I think there's a lot to take away, right, from the key additions, the departures, things like that, and like obviously a lot of Georgia fans are going to look at week 3, and that might be it, but. We learned this last year, right? With these kind of a preview situations here, there's a lot of names that get brought up that stick out to you. You know what I mean? It happened in 2021, right? So I love doing these kind of things because you do understand your opponent. It matters, right? If you're a real one, you do the research, you understand your opponent, you find the deficiencies, the efficiencies, and you just go from there. So if you're listening, watching, this is why we do what we do, right? Chris, hold on, let's see here. So Mitch Allday throws a good stat here to see how this goes. Gamecocks currently have 5 of the top 7 players from South Carolina committed. Clemson has none.
It is weird how, and I understand Clemson's committed to recruiting nationally in a national brand, but, you want to lock down the state, man. I mean, there's still good football players in the state of South Carolina. And I think, again, it's a testament what Mitch brings up, a testament to Shane Beamer, his coaching staff. They put a great importance on recruiting the state. South Carolina is utilizing NIL. Also beating the Clemson Tigers, I think, certainly helps those recruiting efforts. So, yeah, the Gamecocks are making recruiting the state a priority. They're also, of course, going out and about, going to different regions, as is evidenced by going to the DMV and dominating that area. But, locking down the state, keeping your best guys home is important. And, I mean, Shane Beamer's doing as well a job as I think anybody has ever done at doing that.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna say this, but when you look at what Clemson's doing, they are hitting up Georgia pretty hard. So keep that in mind. I'm not just gonna leave that there, but I think that's a good comment to wrap up on. Chris, for those that might be interested, want to follow your content, man, how can people that are listening or watching follow you? And tell me about the Spurs Up Show, man.
Yeah, man. So the Spurs Up Show. I'm Chris Phillips of the Spurs Up Show. We're a Gamecocks entity. All-encompassing podcast, live show, merchandise, social media, events, you name it, we do it practically. We're on Twitter or X, however you want to call it. We're at the Spurs Up Show on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, wherever you get content. We also air a daily live show called The Daily Crow, which airs noon to 3 Eastern time, Monday through Friday. We take questions, comments, calls. So you want to call in, talk ball, chat, whatever, talk some crap, you can do so Monday through Friday, noon to 3. And the podcast drops daily under the name The Spurs Up Show, of course, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts as well. And during the football season, Rob, we'll actually be adding a new piece of content, the Spurs Up Show post-game call-in show after every single game. We'll go live. Similar format to how we do the Daily Crow, but we'll go live. And it'll be nothing but calls, comments, what have you, immediately following the conclusion of every South Carolina football game. Cannot wait, man. The content's going to be bleeding out the eyeball. Should be a great time, and I appreciate you having me, man.
Absolutely. So, obviously, that is all we have for tonight. Listen, if you're watching, make sure to like, follow, subscribe, do all that stuff. It's all free. If you're listening, hey, leave us a review. All right, Apple Podcast, Spotify. I'm gonna call it a night here, man. With that being said, oh yeah, hey Robbie, by the way, Zaxby's is mid. Hope you have a good one. The y'all know the Spurs
real ones know. Yeah, if you're know. If you watch TDC, you know.
Clip it and send it to you. We got to do that. I
love it. I love it.
With that being said, though, have a great night. Thanks again, Chris, for coming on. It's a pleasure, my man. And with that being said, have a great day. We'll catch y'all Wednesday. And go Dogs.